Thank you. My partner Joris will now take over for the introduction of our topic. Joris, please.
Yeah, so good afternoon. I will be discussing about making a case for intersectionality. But before that, let me give just a brief introduction to our topic, anti-discrimination. So non-discrimination is an integral part of the principle of equality. So thus, it's a relevant ingredient to the Indian Constitution. It ensures that no one is denied their rights because of factors such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, or birth. So for this reason, anti-discrimination law is one of the decisive tools for achieving such goals. So now, a case for intersectionality. In India, anti-discrimination legislation has generally recognized only a single axis discrimination and not discrimination based on multiple identities. So as per the Oxford Dictionary, we can define intersectionality as a framework for conceptualizing a person, a group of people, or social problem as affected by a number of discriminations and disadvantages. So an example would be a Dalit woman being discriminated on 2 grounds based on gender and caste, or a disabled Dalit man discriminated on the grounds of caste and disability. So despite there being the protection of marginalized categories and tribes guaranteed by the Scheduled Category and Scheduled Tribes Act of 1989, there is still an overwhelming amount of stigma associated with just being a woman of lower caste that hampers their access to justice. In fact, past several instances of rape cases and sexual violence toward Dalit women have been accounted as not deserving the protection under the SC-ST Act 1989. And also, it fails to account for the multiple identity that makes it unreliable, such as in the case of the racial discrimination we can see in the northeastern region, where a statistic released by the government shows that the proportion of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes to the total population in Sikkim, for example, is 4.6% and 33.8% respectively. For Assam, 7.5% and 12.4% for Manipur, 3.8% and 35.1%. Therefore, they face discrimination based on being a member of the mentioned groups above and on racial features. So this leads us to bring up the prospect of the Equality Bill 2019 introduced by Shashi Tharoor, which carries hopes to rectify the situation, which has unfortunately not been passed even till now. So I will give the speech to my colleagues.
Yeah, sure. So now we will be discussing a few policies or acts, anti-discrimination policies and acts. The Indian Penal Code, section 153A, it specifically deals with all kinds of discrimination and hate crimes and criminalizes the use of languages that promotes discrimination or violence against people on the basis of race, caste, sex, place of birth, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation, or any other category. Then we have the SC and ST Act of 1989, which specifically deals with all kinds of discrimination and hate crimes on the basis of caste. The Transgender Person Protection of Rights Act of 2019, which specifically deals with all kinds of discrimination and hate crimes faced by people on the basis of their gender identity and gender expression. It prohibited discrimination against them in employment, education, houses, healthcare, and other services. We also have the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Acts, which specifically prohibits discrimination and violence against people with specific and mental disabilities. There are few other acts also, such as the Equal Remuneration Act, the Hindu Succession Act, the HIV and AIDS Act 2017. What can be noted is that the SC and ST Act of 1989 criminalizes discrimination based on both caste and gender. Further, most identity-based legislations in India are primarily penal statutes. The Right of Person with Disabilities Act of 2016 is one example of legislation that provides for welfare measures, but even this law places positive duties and obligations mainly on public authorities and not the private sector. Hence, there are serious gaps in existing statuses. India currently does not have single comprehensive legislation on discriminatory practices. Instead, there are various laws that prohibit certain kind of discriminatory practices and protects the interest of vulnerable communities such as workmen, women, persons with HIV and AIDS, persons with disabilities, transgender person, and members of certain socially backward classes. Now, I would like my partner Joris to take on the presentation.
Yeah. Okay, who are the stakeholders in a policy? A stakeholder's primary role is to help an organization so as to meet strategic objectives, and in contributing the experience and perspective to the project. So
Just a reminder, 7 minutes are up. I would request you to wrap up in 30 seconds.
So they can also provide necessary materials and resources. Their support is crucial to a successful project. If they don't like the results, the project can often be considered a failure or even all goals were met. So we will then discuss the stakeholders of this act, Indian Penal Code and the ST Act, Transgender Persons Act 2019. Next. So the stakeholders in this act are internal stakeholders, individual or groups who are directly and or financially involved in the operational process. Here they are governments, bureaucrats, and employees. External stakeholders, those who do not directly involved but are affected somehow by the action and outcomes of the process. Here they are local communities, private companies, and their workers. So this is my research question. It's about investigating racial discrimination in northeastern India, how it is comprehensively covered by the recent policy debates, and what could be the solution forward. So my conceptual and analytical framework would be to include those specific concepts such as social inclusion and intersectionality, and the source of data would be secondary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, I would like to invite team All About Siksha.